Hello, my name is Heather Monroe and I'm the Town Administrator for the Town of Paxton. Today we'll be doing a presentation for the FY26 Budget Overview. This is the same presentation that was presented at the Select Board meeting on Monday, April 14th, 2025. Before we get started, let's go over a few helpful definitions and terms. While there are a lot of terms involved in municipal budgeting, these are 4 of the most common ones that will come up in this presentation and you may find helpful. The first is that of an abatement. An abatement is a reduction or elimination of tax or charge granted after an application is approved. The next is assessed valuation. This is a value that is assigned as a basis for levying taxes based on property's full and fair cash value as set by the assessors. Free cash is the remaining unrestricted funds from the prior year, including any leftover free cash, underspent expenses, or excess revenues. The tax levy is the amount a community raises each year through real estate and personal property taxes. We'll begin with the FY26 budget process and an explanation of how we got to where we are today. Back in 2024, in October, there was a kickoff working session that was held between the Select Board and the Finance Committee. At this working session, there was a discussion that included an estimated financial forecast for 5 years, looking at the town of Paxton's past history and some assumptions and where things were going to land. Based on that information, some deliverables came out of the meeting. The first was a letter that was jointly authored by the Select Board, the Finance Committee, and the Town Administrator that would go to the Wachusett Regional School District to let them know that in the budget season for FY26, any budget assessment to the town of Paxton's share that exceeded 2.5% of just the assessment, not including the debt, would be put forward to a override for the town of Paxton. In the past, what had previously happened was all of the town administrators and the town manager and holding would get together, would determine what they could afford for their finances for the upcoming fiscal year for increases, and then they would write a joint letter to the Wachusett Regional School District. Last year, during the budget process and when the town was trying to determine what the number was going to be needed for an override, there was a lot of questions around the piece relative to the split of the town and the school budget. This determination early on made it a lot easier when discussions were had in early April as to what an override number would be. The second deliverable that came out of this working session was actually a draft budget calendar, figuring out where we were going to go, what was going to happen approximately when, and how we were going to get there. The next piece was budget guidance. Based on what we knew for the financial forecast, even if every department had come in with a 0% increase or what was called a level funded budget from FY25, we would still be experiencing a deficit. Knowing going into this that we were going to need an override to continue providing the services that the town currently had, the decision was made to instruct departments to keep their budgets within 2.5% of the FY25 numbers. Understanding that a substantial amount of the finances come from employment and employee costs, there was also a mechanism put in that allowed for any request that the department truly needed above that 2.5% number would be calculated on a separate form. The separate form was simply termed out of guidance, and that was just to keep everything together and easier to look at when we moved forward. Once all those pieces were out there and everything was delivered, the next step in the process was budget submittal. So departments worked on their budgets, submitted things, reviewed them with the town administrator. Town administrator, which is myself, compiled the budget, both all of the information on the expense side that was put into a over 100 and something page Excel workbook, as well as all of the out of guidance requests. Again, the needed pieces for the departments on a separate Excel sheet and a packet. That was all delivered to the Finance Committee. The next step was Finance Committee and Capital Improvement Committee held their various meetings from January through the end of March. On April 2nd, there was a joint Finance Committee and Select Board meeting in which they reviewed the current status of the budget, the deficit, and came up with an override vote. From here, where we go is there's an election. It's our annual town election. It will be held on Monday, May 12th. And that election will feature a ballot question. The ballot question includes the amount for the override. After May 12th, the next step is the town meeting. So the annual town meeting has now been scheduled for June 16th, and that will be held at the Anna Maria College. The purpose of having this meeting after the election is it gives us the ability to have one election and one town meeting. Those who are around and attended the process last year or following along notice that we had multiple elections, multiple town meetings going back and forth. This allows us to have a definitive answer from the town voters after the election, which will change potentially or alter the current budget as proposed. So we only have to go to town meeting once. After that point, the hope is to have an approved budget for FY26 before the end of June. Here's the FY26 budget summary. So the proposed budget for fiscal year 26, revenues are estimated at $16,209,541, with the expenses estimated at $17,339,509. The expected deficit of $1,129,968. The deficit split is something that's notated here. This we worked in reverse. Anything that was over the 2.5% assessment increase for the town is what we came up with for the schools portion of the deficit, which is $411,791. When subtracting that from the total deficit number, the balance for the town share is $718,177. The next portion of this presentation goes over the revenues, or as we like to call it, the Great Prediction. So how do we calculate the estimated revenue for the town? We look at four components. The first is the tax levy, the state aid and charges or assessments, the local receipts, and other funds. So the tax levy, most of this is a mathematical calculation. We look at the levy from last year. We add 2.5% and add the new growth, and that becomes this year's starting number. We then add 2.5% to that, and then we add in our new growth as well as our numbers for any continuing exclusions that are either capital or debt exclusions. So we have a couple for the town, the school. We also have the road stabilization that number actually goes up 2.5% each year. One of the variables we have here is new growth. This is a number that's estimated by the assessor's office. New growth is something that people can most easily identify with a new house or a new deck on a building or an addition. Things that are often not counted towards new growth would be a new roof or siding or windows. So it's something that's a little bit more substantial. And what that does is that adds real estate value to the town, and that real estate value is then taxed at the town's tax rate. And the amount that's taxed comes into the town as something new that we didn't have before. So that first year that it shows up in the new growth number. Each year, the assessor's office is very conservative with this number. They do try and strive to get as high as they can with this, but unfortunately, sometimes there's just outside factors that restrict it a bit. The new growth has to be things that are concluded and recorded prior to June 30th of that prior fiscal year. So when we're looking at FY26, which is after July's new growth, we're actually looking at everything that was accounted for up to June 30th of 2025. So right now the assessor's office is making a guess based on what they already know and what they expect to pick up between now and the end of June. That number is a little bit lower this year than in the past. Our number has been staying steady around 80,000. Last year it was down. It did not hit the estimated number we had. It was in the 70s. And moving forward to next fiscal year, we're estimating it to be about 65,000. This is a number that was proposed by the assessor's office and supported by finance committee. The last piece of the tax levy piece is the overlay. So this is something that we use as a 5-year average. Overlay is where the assessor's office does exemptions from and abatements. So they have to look at what they know is coming up, any outstanding cases that haven't resolved yet from prior fiscal years. And the state requires us to do this on a 5-year average number. We cannot go lower than that. The next bulk of funds comes from state aid, and then it's minus any of the state assessments or charges. So this number changes over time through our budget season as well as through the state's budget season. It starts with the governor's numbers in January, moves on to the House updated numbers in the Senate, then the Joint Ways and Means Committee, and then finally the approved signed off budget by the governor. These figures, the later we have a town meeting, the more accurate they're going to be. They do change. They used to be a lot more reliable several years ago. We knew that our largest pot of funds, which was the unrestricted governmental aid, was going to come in around 3%. We don't have as much surety on that as we had in the past. So those numbers start with the governor's numbers and then they change. Usually we hope that they wash out at the end of the day, so things go up, things go down, they stay about steady. The next pot of funds is local receipts. So this includes motor vehicle excise, meals tax, building permits, fees for the town clerk's office, fees for treasurer collector, late fees, bank interest, and all of those pieces all go in here. We tend to be very conservative with the estimates. The past couple of years, we've had much tighter budget seasons, so we've actually been estimating conservatively high. Unfortunately, when we do that, it has the potential to generate less free cash. One of our major free cash generators has always been motor vehicle excise for us. So when we go higher with those numbers, we always bear the risk that we may not hit the number we think we can, but we also have the potential of not bringing in as much free cash as we normally would in past years. And because we currently use that to offset our budget to a substantial number, that could be a problem for us. The last pot of funds is other funds. Right now, we use 100% of our available free cash. For us, for FY26, that's going to be $500,000. The second pot of funds we are using is $400,000 of ambulance receipts we reserve for appropriation. This number too has been higher the past couple of years than it had been previously. The next part of our presentation deals with expenses, so the cost to provide town services. Next is our expense budget, and what is in this? So what's included in the expense budget? Contractual obligations, fixed costs, level services with a few exceptions. Replacing cuts from FY25. So previously in FY24, we had an additional police officer, we had a building commissioner who worked additional hours, we had funding for street line painting and more supplies and equipment for the DPW, as well as additional funds for training for the fire department, and also looking at training for other departments and ours. It also begins an IT replacement program. Town has about 35 devices, and over the course of 4 years, we're going to attempt to try to replace approximately 10 per year so that we are bringing everything up to date and also protecting ourselves from cybersecurity issues, which tend to come up more with older devices, especially as software and Windows programs are no longer supported. And the last piece is adding a map subscription. So at the past finance committee meetings, we had discussed a program called Near Map as well as Pushpin. These are two programs that go hand in hand. One is similar to a Google Map piece, and the other one provides additional data. This is something that a lot of assessors departments are using throughout the state of Massachusetts, as well as other departments are finding very helpful. It allows a department to go in and to look at a specific location on the map. It lets us zoom in within 6 inches. We can account for any changes in that property. A lot of the assessors' offices are finding that within the first few months of having these tools at hand, they're actually able to bring back into the town new growth that exceeds the amount of the cost of the actual annual subscription. It is a subscription that once the town has it for that year, any of the employees within the town are able to use it at no additional cost. The add-on to the subscription is actually called Pushpin. And what Pushpin does, it allows one to look at a street at a time and actually develops a CSV file to be able to go back and look at from one year to the next year and notify the user of any changes for those locations. Other departments find this specifically helpful when they're looking at planning, when they're looking at trying to figure out what someone is asking for with the building permit, conservation issues, and so forth. What's not included in this year's budget is expansion of services, new staff beyond the return to the FY24 staffing levels, and a departmental wish list. One of the questions that comes up a lot is what are the budget drivers for this year's budget? We have approximately $1 million of budget drivers this year. The first is $572,000, and that's the Wachusett Regional School District, as it went up 7.35% for us from the year prior. Next is $134,000 for the DPW. So this includes within it the normal 2.5% increase that was within their budget, as well as things that were captured in their out of guidance form or additional needs that they had that just did not fit within the 2.5%. So this includes things that were cut from the previous year, street line painting, guardrail repair, use of additional equipment, additional supplies to be able to handle and manage the roads. The next part is $120,000 for police, same as the DPW. This includes their normal 2.5% in this number, as well as everything above it. And the majority of that's approximately $90,000 for replacement of a previously cut police officer position, as well as contractual obligations. Next piece is fire. This is $79,000, same as the last two departments. And this also includes training, apparatus, SCBAs, things that are needed by the fire department that had been cut in the previous year. $56,000 is the increase from Bay Path, which is a 9.74% increase over the prior year. Our retirement through Worcester Regional County Retirement is $37,000 or 4.25% increase. IT services increased by $24,500 or 24.23% increase. This reflects the increase of the approximate $10,000 for the map services of Nearmap and Pushpin, and the remaining of that, the majority is for replacement devices. $16,000 is for regional dispatch. Those who may recall, when we regionalized dispatch initially, each year we were increasing in the percentage of the assessment we were paying, and State 911 was covering a grant for a certain percentage. This year in FY25, State 911 grants cover 25% of our assessment. When we get into FY26, which is reflected in this budget, it covers 0%, and the town is responsible for 100% of the assessment, which therefore is reflected in that $16,000 increase or a 15.12% increase for us from the year prior. Lastly is $15,000, which is town insurance, which reflects a 6.73% increase. As insurance rates are going up nationwide, they're also impacting the town's insurance through the Massachusetts Interlocal Insurance Agency. There's a few other pieces in the budget that have increased. However, those increases are mostly washes with the revenue side, or if the increases are under $10,000, they're not reflected here. This slide provides the override information. So the override amount that was voted on by the Select Board and discussed with Select Board and Finance Committee on April 2nd was for $1,130,000. This took the current deficit that was just over $1,129,000 and some change and rounded up. With that override amount, that equates to approximately $166 per quarter or per quarterly tax bill to the average single-family house of a value of $507,000. In order for this override to pass, it needs to pass both town election or the ballot question on May 12th and town meeting. Town meeting is scheduled for June 16th. Lastly, the question we get often is, where do we go to get more information? So there's a few different options. The first is the town's website, the FY26 budget page. So at the very top of the website, there's a tab dedicated to FY26 budget. That page has a great deal of information, from the current budget documents to a link to watch each of the finance committee meetings or joint finance committee select board meetings that relate to the budget. It has capital improvement information, all of their meetings, general information about the budget, materials, supplemental, and so forth. There's also an informational session that's currently scheduled for May 5th at the Paxton Center School at 7 p.m. And the last option is, if there's any questions, we've created a dedicated email just for questions on the budget at info@townofpaxton.net. Thank you.